The reception hall smelled of $50,000 worth of white lilies, but beneath the expensive perfume lay the stench of something rotting. I watched my daughter force a smile for the cameras, her eyes pleading silently. During our embrace, she slipped a terrifyingly light piece of paper into my pocket. I retreated to the restroom to read the note, and my world fractured. It contained just 3 words scrawled in shaky lipstick. Mom, help me. My name is Eleanor Hartwell. For 30 years. I worked in the basement of the Northbridge Public Records Office, filing away the deeds, debts, and deaths of a town that preferred to keep its secrets buried under dust. I learned early on that paper never forgets, even when people do. Now, at 57 years old and 5 years into widowhood, I stood in the center of a ballroom that smelled of expensive lilies and old money, feeling more invisible than I ever had among my filing cabinets. This was Raventon. It was not just a town. It was a fortress built by the Whitlock family, the people my daughter Lydia was marrying into. The wedding reception was being held at their private estate, a sprawling mansion that looked like it had been transported brick by brick from a European monarchy. There were over 300 guests in the room, yet I had never felt more isolated. The women wore silk gowns that likely cost more than my car, and the men spoke in the low, confident tones of people who own the police force. They glanced at me with polite indifference. The poor mother-in-law from Northbridge, a necessary prop for the photographs, but otherwise irrelevant. I scanned the crowd for Lydia. When the double doors opened and she stepped through, the room erupted in applause, but my heart sank. My daughter was beautiful, draped in white lace and diamonds, but she looked brittle. Her smile was tight, a grimace painted over with lipstick. She did not look like a bride in love. She looked like a hostage negotiating for her life. Her eyes darted around the room, frantic and wide, avoiding everyone, especially me. She moved through the crowd, guided by the firm hand of her new husband, Graham Whitlock. When they finally reached my table, Graham beamed with a charm that did not reach his cold, calculating eyes. "Eleanor." "Look at her," Graham said, his grip on Lydia's waist tightening just enough to turn her knuckles white as she held her bouquet. "Doesn't she look perfect?" "She always looks beautiful," I said, trying to catch Lydia's eye. Lydia stepped forward to hug me. It should have been a warm moment, a daughter embracing her mother on her wedding day. Instead, she collapsed against me, her body trembling like a leaf in a storm. For a second, her composure cracked. "Mom." She breathed against my ear, her voice barely audible over the string quartet. Before I could ask her what was wrong, I felt it. Her hand slipped into the pocket of my navy dress. It was a quick, desperate movement, hidden by the folds of her gown. She pulled back abruptly, the mask of the happy bride slamming back into place. "I have to go," Lydia said, her voice shaking. "Graham is waiting for the toast." She turned and walked away, leaving me standing there with a burning sensation in my pocket. I waited exactly 5 minutes before excusing myself. I walked calmly to the restrooms, ignoring the waiters offering champagne and caviar. Inside the ladies' room, I locked the heavy oak door of the farthest stall. My hands shook as I reached into my pocket and pulled out the piece of paper. It was a scrap torn from a napkin, the edges jagged. I unfolded it, and the handwriting was unmistakable, though hurried and messy. "Mom, help me." The air in the bathroom seemed to vanish. I stared at the 3 words until they blurred. Time seemed to freeze. This was not cold feet. This was not pre-wedding jitters. This was a scream for help from a girl who never asked for anything. I leaned against the marble wall, my mind racing back to the bruises I used to hide, the excuses I used to make. I knew what fear looked like. I was looking at it in my daughter's eyes. Suddenly, a sharp knock on the restroom door shattered the silence. "Mrs. Hartwell," a voice called out from the other side. It was a woman's voice, clipped and professional. "Mrs. Hartwell. Are you in there? They are cutting the cake." I shoved the note deep into my bra, close to my heart. I took a deep breath, smoothing the fabric of my dress. I will be right out," I replied, forcing my voice to sound steady. I unlocked the door and stepped out. The woman, one of the wedding planners, was staring at me with a suspicion that felt entirely too heavy for a simple delay. "We cannot start without the mother of the bride," she said, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Please, follow me." I walked back into the ballroom, but the room had changed. The flowers no longer looked beautiful. They looked like funeral wreaths. The laughter of the guests sounded sharp and mocking. I watched Graham whisper something into Lydia's ear, and I saw her flinch, a microscopic movement that no one else noticed. I saw Evelyn Whitlock, Graham's mother, watching Lydia from across the room with the gaze of a warden watching an inmate. They thought I was just a simple woman from Northbridge. They thought I was weak. But as I took my seat, I let the fear harden into something cold and sharp. I had spent 30 years managing records, finding the truth in the smallest details. I was not just a guest anymore. I was a witness. And I was going to find out exactly what they were doing to my daughter. As I sat at the table, picking at a salad that probably cost $40, my mind replayed the last 12 months like a corrupted film reel. The warning signs had been there, scattered like breadcrumbs I had been too blind to follow. Before Graham Whitlock, Lydia had been vibrant. She was loud, opinionated, and laughed with her whole body. But ever since she met Graham, the heir to the Whitlock real estate empire, my daughter had been slowly erased. It started with the phone calls. They used to be daily, filled with rambling stories about her work and bad dates. Then, they became weekly. Then, sporadic. When we did speak, her voice sounded flat, rehearsed. Every conversation followed the same script. "I am fine. Mom," she would say. "Everything is good. Graham is taking care of everything." I remembered a dinner we had 6 months ago at a steakhouse in the city. I had driven 2 hours to see them. I remembered asking Lydia about her graphic design portfolio, a career she had built from scratch and loved fiercely. "How is the new client project going?" "Honey," I had asked. Before Lydia could even open her mouth, Graham had answered. He did not look up from cutting his steak, his knife slicing through the meat with surgical precision. "Lydia is taking a break from work," Graham had said smoothly. "We decided it was too much stress. She needs to focus on our future." Lydia had just stared at her plate, her fork hovering over her potatoes. She did not correct him. She did not argue. She just shrank into her chair. At the time, I told myself I was being overprotective. I told myself that maybe she wanted a break. I was a fool. Then there was Evelyn Whitlock. I looked across the room at the mother of the groom, holding court at the head table. She was a woman who weaponized generosity over the past year. Every time I offered to visit or help, Evelyn had stepped in with a better offer. Why should I drive down when she could send a private car for Lydia? Why should Lydia stay at my small apartment when she had a suite at the manor? It was not kindness. It was isolation wrapped in silk. I looked down at my hands, clenched in my lap. Guilt washed over me, cold and heavy. I should have asked more questions. I should have driven to Raventon and banged on their door when she stopped returning my texts. Instead, I had been intimidated by their wealth, cowed by the sheer magnitude of their influence. I had let them take her. My gaze snapped back to the head table. Lydia was sitting next to Graham, and I noticed a small, repetitive movement. Her left hand kept tugging at the lace sleeve of her right arm. She pulled it down, over her wrist, again and again. It was a nervous tick, or so it seemed. But then I saw her wince slightly when the fabric rubbed against her skin. The sleeve was long, opaque lace, designed to cover everything from shoulder to wrist. In the heat of the ballroom, it must have been stifling. Was she hiding a bruise? The thought made my stomach turn. A young waiter appeared at my side to refill my water glass. He looked no older than 20, his face pale and anxious. "Excuse me," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice casual. "The family? They seem very particular about the schedule. Do they not?" The waiter froze for a second, the pitcher hovering over my glass. He glanced nervously toward the head table, specifically at Uncle Morris, a man with a thick neck and eyes like a shark, who was watching the room from the corner. "The Whitlocks are very strict, ma'am," the waiter whispered, barely moving his lips. "They do not like mistakes. Please, do not make a scene." He poured the water quickly and hurried away before I could ask anything else. His fear was palpable. It confirmed the cold knot in my chest. This was not just a strict family. This was a regime. I felt the note burning against my skin inside my dress. "Mom, help me." I wanted to stand up, scream, and drag Lydia out of there right now. But I knew that would be a disaster. They had security at every door. They had the police chief sitting 3 tables away, laughing at a joke Evelyn had just made. If I made a scene, they would usher me out as the crazy, drunk mother-in-law, and Lydia would be left behind, punished for my outburst. No. I had to be smarter than that. I took a sip of water, forcing my face into a neutral mask. I felt eyes on me. It was not just paranoia. I could feel the weight of their surveillance. Uncle Morris was looking in my direction. Evelyn glanced my way every few minutes. They were waiting for me to crack. They expected the poor widow to be overwhelmed, perhaps a little emotional, but ultimately compliant. They did not know who I was. They did not know that for 30 years. I dealt with liars, thieves, and bureaucrats who tried to hide the truth in mountains of paperwork. I knew how to look for the missing piece. I knew how to be patient. I was alone here. The guests were their friends. The staff were on their payroll. The town was their playground. But I had one thing they did not account for. I was a mother who had just been given her marching orders. I was not leaving this wedding without my daughter. And if I had to burn this entire mansion down to get her out, I would strike the match myself. I needed to get to her. The distance between my assigned seat at table 12 and the elevated head table felt like a minefield, but I could not sit still any longer. I stood up, smoothing my skirt, and began to make my way toward the bride and groom. I had barely taken 10 steps before a smiling bridesmaid, A tall blonde woman I had never met stepped directly into my path. Mrs. Hartwell. She chirped, her voice too loud and too bright. Where are you off to? The speeches are about to start. I just need a moment with Lydia, I said, trying to step around her. I need to fix her veil. Oh, do not worry, she said, placing a hand firmly on my arm. Evelyn has a stylist on standby. Lydia is perfect. You should sit down. You do not want to ruin the flow of the video. Do you? She gently but forcefully guided me back toward my seat. As I turned, I locked eyes with the man at the end of the head table, Uncle Morris. He was Graham's uncle, a heavy-set man with grey hair and eyes that missed nothing. He was not eating. He was not drinking. He was watching Lydia with the intense, predatory focus of a guard dog waiting for a prisoner to make a run for it. Whenever Lydia shifted in her chair, Morris's gaze sharpened. I felt a wave of nausea. I excused myself again, heading toward the side exit leading to the restrooms, hoping to find a back way to the staging area. The hallway was quieter, the thick carpets muffling the sound of the band. Then I heard it, a stifle cry. It was faint, barely a whisper, coming from behind a service door labeled Private. I rushed over and tried the handle. It was locked. Hello, I whispered, pressing my ear to the wood. Is someone in there? There was a shuffling sound, then silence. I stepped back, my heart hammering against my ribs. A housekeeping cart rattled down the hall, pushed by an older woman in a grey uniform. She saw me staring at the door and slowed down, checking to make sure we were alone. She was crying all morning, the woman whispered, her eyes wide with shared fear. The bride. When I brought the towels, she was shaking so hard she could not hold the glass of water. They told her to stop ruining the makeup. Who told her, I asked, gripping the cart. The mother, she said, looking over her shoulder. Mrs. Whitlock. She told her. Stop acting like a child, or we will give you a reason to cry. It was awful. The maid hurried away before I could ask more. I stood there, the blood draining from my face. My daughter was not just unhappy, she was being threatened. I returned to the ballroom, my senses heightened. I watched Lydia's hands. She was clutching her clutch bag on the table, but something was wrong. Lydia was glued to her phone. She used it for work, for news, for everything. But there was no phone on the table, no phone in her hand. She had been stripped of her communication. I moved along the edge of the room, passing two women in expensive furs, sipping martinis near a pillar. They were speaking in hushed tones, their heads bent together. Surprised the family managed to bury that story. One woman murmured. He broke that poor girl's jaw in college. $2 million, they said. Shh, the other hissed, glancing around. Graham has changed, or at least, he learned to be quieter about it. The room spun, an abuser. They had married my daughter to a man with a history of violence, and they had paid to erase the evidence. I looked at the head table. The speeches were ending. Graham stood up, buttoning his jacket. He looked down at Lydia. He did not speak. He simply tilted his head slightly to the left. Immediately, obediently. Lydia stood up. It was Pavlovian. He looked at her wine glass, and she picked it up. He looked at the floor, and she lowered her gaze. It was a display of absolute control that made my skin crawl. They began to move toward the dance floor for the ceremonial first dance. They had to pass right by my table. This was my chance. Lydia walked stiffly, her eyes glazed over. As she neared me, her gaze flickered. For a split second, the fog lifted, and I saw the terror again. She stumbled slightly. It looked like an accident to everyone else, a clumsy step in high heels. But as she stumbled, she let go of her bouquet. The bundle of white roses hit the floor and rolled, stopping right at the toe of my shoe. Lydia looked at me, her lips parted. "Mom," she mouthed, no sound coming out. It was a signal. She had dropped it on purpose to create a pause, a second where she could stop walking toward him. I lunged forward. I did not care about the cameras or the guests. I reached out to grab her hand, to pull her behind me. "Lydia," I called out, before my fingers could brush her skin. A heavy hand clamped onto my shoulder. It was not Morris, but a large man in a dark suit with an earpiece, one of the private security guards posing as ushers. He squeezed my shoulder hard enough to bruise, halting my momentum instantly. "Mrs. Hartwell," the guard said, his voice low and menacing, a smile plastered on his face for the benefit of the onlookers. "You dropped your napkin. Please, sit down. The dance is starting. You do not want to cause a scene now. Do you?" He physically forced me back into my chair. Graham did not even look at me. He gripped Lydia's elbow, his fingers digging into her flesh, and dragged her onto the dance floor. The music started, a romantic ballad that sounded like a dirge, and I sat there, trapped, watching a monster spin my daughter around the room. The heavy bass of the music vibrated through the floorboards, but I could no longer hear the melody. All I could feel was the ghost of a touch on my own arm, an echo from 30 years ago. Watching Graham spin Lydia around the dance floor, I did not see a groom in love. I saw Richard. I saw my late husband. For decades, people in our small town praised Richard as a good man, a provider, a pillar of the community. They did not see what happened when the front door closed. Richard never needed to raise his fist to hurt me. He did it with words. He did it by slowly, methodically stripping away everything that made me Eleanor until I was nothing more than an extension of his will. He chose my clothes. He chose my friends. He managed the money so tightly that I had to ask for $5 just to buy feminine products. I had spent 20 years of my life apologizing for taking up space in my own home. I looked at Lydia. Her eyes were wide and vacant, fixed on a point over Graham's shoulder. She was dissociating. I knew that look because I had worn it myself 1,000 times across the dinner table. The note in my pocket felt heavy against my ribs. "Mom, help me." It was not just a plea. It was a mirror. My daughter was standing exactly where I had stood, trapping herself in a cage made of gold instead of the brick one I had lived in. But the lock was the same. I closed my eyes and let the memory of that Tuesday night wash over me. It was the night I finally left. I remembered the sound of Richard snoring in the bedroom, the terrifying loudness of the zipper on my suitcase, and the feeling of cold rain on my face as I walked 3 miles to the bus station with nothing but $40 hidden in my shoe. I had been terrified. I had been convinced I would fail. But I had walked away. I had built a life from scratch, shelving documents in a basement, paying for my own small apartment, reclaiming my name. That fear had forged me into iron. I opened my eyes. The fear I felt for Lydia was still there, but it was changing. It was hardening. The trembling in my hands stopped. "You are not going to win this time," I whispered to no one. my voice low and steady. This was not just about saving Lydia. This was the fight I never finished. I had run away from Richard, but I had never stood up to him. I had let him die believing he owned me. I would not let Graham Whitlock believe the same thing about my daughter. I watched the room with new clarity. The Whitlocks were powerful. Yes, they had money, influence, and security guards who could crush a woman like me without blinking. If I tried to drag Lydia out the front door, they would stop me. They would claim I was hysterical. They would turn the police against me. I needed to be smarter. I needed to be the woman who managed the archives. The woman who knew that every fortress has a crack in the foundation if you look hard enough. I glanced around the room, mapping out the exits. The main doors were guarded. The kitchen staff were coming in and out of a service entrance to the left of the stage. That was a possibility. I looked at Lydia again. The dance was ending. Graham leaned in to kiss her, a performative, possessive gesture for the applause. Lydia did not kiss back. She just endured it. I took a sip of my water, my mind racing. I needed to get her alone. I needed to separate her from the pack. And I needed to do it before they took her away for the honeymoon. Because once she got on that plane, I might never get her back. Excuse me, I said to the empty chair next to me. I stood up, moving much slower this time. I did not look at the head table. I did not look at the guards. I hunched my shoulders slightly, adopting the posture of a tired, defeated old woman who just needed to use the restroom. I walked toward the back of the hall, feeling Uncle Morris's eyes burning into my back. Let them watch. Let them think I was weak. Let them think I was just a mother from Northbridge who knew her place. They were about to find out that the most dangerous thing in the world is a woman who has already survived hell and refuses to let her daughter walk into the flames. I slipped out of the ballroom while the guests were distracted by the cutting of the cake. The air in the hallway was cooler, stripping away the stifling heat of the party. I walked softly, my heels sinking into the plush carpet, moving away from the noise and toward the private wing of the estate where the family had their holding rooms. I heard a door slam. Then, voices raised in anger echoed from a study down the hall. I pressed myself against the wall, holding my breath. It was Graham. I do not care what she says now. Graham's voice was sharp, cutting through the heavy oak door. She will do as we agreed. Or she knows exactly what happens to that little design firm she loves so much. There was a pause, then the sound of footsteps pacing. Just keep her smiling for 2 more hours. He continued. Once we are in the car, she is my problem. My blood ran cold. I waited until the footsteps faded toward the back exit of the room. I took a risk. I pushed the door open and slipped inside. The study was dark, lit only by a desk lamp. On the mahogany desk sat a stack of papers, crisp and white against the dark wood. I moved quickly, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was a document, prenuptial agreement. But as I scanned the pages, the legal jargon twisted into a cage. It was not an agreement. It was a surrender. Section 5, Clause 3 stated that in the event of separation, Lydia would receive 0 spousal support. Another clause detailed that all intellectual property created by the spouse during the marriage would belong to the Whitlock estate. They were not just marrying her. They were acquiring her like a subsidiary company. I looked down at the wastebasket next to the desk. A ball of paper sat on top of the trash. I reached down and uncrumpled it. The paper was stained with what looked like a tear. I recognized Lydia's handwriting immediately, though the loops were jagged and pressed hard into the paper. I cannot do this. Please let me. The sentences trailed off, unfinished. She had tried to write a refusal, a goodbye, or a plea, and she had been stopped. I pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking, but I forced them to be steady. I took a picture of the contract. I took a picture of the crumpled note. Mrs. Hartwell. I spun around, nearly dropping the phone. A young woman in a catering uniform stood in the doorway. She was holding a tray of empty champagne flutes. Her eyes darted from me to the desk and back. I started, trying to find an excuse. The girl stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. "You are her mother," she whispered. It was not a question. "The bride?" "Yes," I said, stepping forward. "Is she okay? Tell me." The girl looked terrified. She lowered her voice to a barely audible hiss. She tried to leave. The girl said, "About 3 hours ago, before the ceremony, she asked the valet for a car. She was crying. She said she needed to go to the station." "What happened?" I demanded. "Mr. Whitlock's brother? The big one," she said, her voice trembling. "He sent the valet away. He took her back inside. He told us that if anyone helped her leave, they would lose their jobs and make sure we never worked in this town again." I felt a cold clarity settle over me. This was not a wedding. It was a hostage situation dressed up in white lace and silk. Lydia was not staying because of duty or pressure. She was staying because she had no way out. They had cut off her transport, monitored her communications, and threatened her livelihood. "Thank you," I said, gripping the girl's arm for a brief second. "You did not see me here." "See who?" she whispered, opening the door for me. I stepped back out into the hallway. The music from the ballroom drifted down the corridor, a sickeningly cheerful tune. I checked the time on my phone. It was 8 o'clock at night. The send-off was scheduled for 10. I had 2 hours. I touched the phone in my pocket, where the evidence was stored. I was not going to wait for the police. I was not going to wait for a lawyer. I was going to get my daughter, and we were going to run. I located the bridal suite at the end of the east corridor, tucked away from the noise of the reception. The door was heavy, solid oak, but it was unlocked. I slipped inside and turned the lock behind me, the click echoing in the silence. Lydia was sitting at the vanity table, staring at her reflection. The room was filled with flowers, but the air felt thin, suffocating. She jumped when she saw me in the mirror, her hand knocking over a bottle of perfume. It shattered, the scent of jasmine exploding into the air. Sickeningly sweet. "Mum," she whispered, her voice cracking. You should not be here. Graham. He will be angry." "I do not care about Graham," I said, walking over and placing my hands on her trembling shoulders. I saw the note. "Lydia, tell me." Lydia crumbled. The perfect posture she had maintained all day collapsed. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders heaving with silent sobs. He changed. "Mom," Lydia choked out, looking up at me with mascara running down her cheeks. The moment I said yes, the moment the ring was on my finger, he became someone else. He took my credit cards. He told me which friends were appropriate and which ones I had to cut off. He checks my phone every night. I feel like I am in a box, and the walls are closing in. "Why did you not tell me?" I asked gently, stroking her hair. "I tried," she cried. "But he threatened my work. He said his family owns half the board of directors at my agency. He said He said he would make sure I never designed anything again in this state. And then… Evelyn. Lydia looked at me, terror in her eyes. Evelyn told me that if I embarrassed them, she would destroy you too, Lydia said, gripping my hand. She said she would dig up dirt on Dad, on your pension, on everything. I could not let them hurt you. My heart broke. She had walked into this trap to protect her career, and stayed in it to protect me. I pulled her up from the chair and wrapped my arms around her. She felt so small, just like she did when she was 6 years old and afraid of the thunder. You are not going to go through this alone, I said firmly. We are leaving, now. But… How Lydia stammered. You do not understand. I am weak. I am not like you. You are unbreakable. You would never let a man treat you like this. I pulled back and looked her in the eyes. It was time to break the pedestal she had put me on. Lydia, listen to me, I said, my voice steady but low. I was not always strong. Your father, Richard, he controlled every breath I took for 20 years. He told me what to wear. He told me I was stupid. He told me I was nothing without him. I stayed because I was scared. I stayed because I thought I deserved it. Lydia stared at me, her mouth slightly open. Shock washed over her face. Dad, she whispered. But he was. He was a good actor, I said, just like Graham. I did not leave because I was brave. Lydia, I left because I realized that if I stayed one more day, the Eleanor you know would cease to exist. I saved myself. And now, I am going to save you. Tears welled up in Lydia's eyes again. But this time, they were different. The fear was replaced by understanding. She nodded, wiping her face with the back of her hand. Okay, she said, her voice gaining a fraction of strength. Okay, let's go. Grab your purse. Leave the dress if you have to, but get your ID. I instructed. Lydia grabbed her clutch. We moved toward the door. I could hear the muffled sound of the band playing a waltz in the distance. We were two women against an empire. But for the first time in years, I felt completely in control. I reached for the handle, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I turned the knob and pulled the door open, ready to run down the hallway and out into the night. But the hallway was not empty. Uncle Morris stood directly in the frame, filling the doorway with his massive, suit-clad body. He was not smiling. His arms were crossed over his chest, and his eyes were cold, hard flint. He looked from Lydia's tear-streaked face to me, and then slowly back to Lydia. He did not move an inch. We were blocked. Morris did not grab us. He did not yell. He simply stood there, a mountain of black wool and silence, blocking the only exit from the dressing room. Lydia shrank back against me, her breath hitching in her throat like a trapped bird. Uncle Morris, Lydia pleaded, her voice barely a whisper. Please, just let us go. I cannot do this. Morris looked down at her. For a moment, his face remained impassive, a stone mask carved by decades of serving the Whitlock family interests. Then he sighed, a heavy sound that seemed to rattle in his chest. It is not that simple. Lydia, Morris said, his voice gravelly and low. The merger with the Kensington Group was signed this morning. It is contingent on this union. If you walk out that door, the family loses $20 million in stock value before the market opens on Monday. I stepped in front of my daughter, shielding her from his gaze. So that is what she is to you? I asked. keeping my voice level despite the fury boiling in my veins. A line item on a spreadsheet. She is a human being, Morris, and Graham is... he is destroying her. Morris shifted his weight, for the first time. His eyes darted to the side, avoiding mine. I saw it then. It was a flicker of something I recognized from my own years of walking on eggshells. It was fear. He was not just an enforcer. He was a prisoner, too. He was afraid of what would happen if he failed. Graham has a temper, Morris admitted, the words coming out slow and reluctant. We handle it? We always handle it. But you must go back. Evelyn is waiting for the ring exchange. If you are not there in 10 minutes. He trailed off, but the threat hung in the air. Morris. Look at me, I said, stepping closer to him, invading his personal space. If we go back out there, Graham will break her. And eventually, she will leave him, or something worse will happen. Imagine the press then. Imagine the scandal of an abuse trial. If she leaves now, it is just cold feet. It is a cancelled wedding. It is embarrassing. Yes, but it is not a crime. You can spin a runaway bride. You cannot spin a monster. Morris looked at me, his jaw tightening. I could see the gears turning in his head, weighing the immediate wrath of Evelyn Whitlock against the long-term disaster of Graham's instability. Evelyn, Morris stammered, wiping sweat from his forehead. She will never allow it. She controls everything. Mrs. Hartwell. You do not know what she is capable of. I know she is not here right now. I pressed. You are... Morris closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them, he looked tired, decades older than his actual age. I need to tell them there is an issue with the dress, Morris muttered, backing away from the door but not stepping aside entirely. I will buy you 5 minutes. But if Evelyn comes, I cannot stop her. He turned and walked briskly down the main hallway toward the ballroom, pulling his phone from his pocket. He was giving us a head start. Come on, I whispered to Lydia. We did not go the way Morris went. I grabbed Lydia's hand and pulled her toward the service corridor I had seen earlier on the floor plan. It was narrow, lined with carts of dirty dishes and linens. We moved quickly, the sound of our heels muffled by the industrial carpet. Suddenly, I stopped. A sound was coming from a small door on our left, labelled Storage 4. It was a low, rhythmic whimpering. I motioned for Lydia to stay back and pressed my ear to the metal door. Please. A voice sobbed from inside. Please let me out. I am sorry about the wine. I promise I will not do it again. It was a man's voice, young and terrified. I tried the handle. Locked. Who is in there? I asked loudly. The sobbing stopped abruptly, replaced by a fearful silence. Please, the voice whispered back. Mr. Whitlock said I have to stay until the reception is over. He said. He said he would break my fingers if I made noise. Lydia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Graham put you in there, I asked, my blood turning to ice. I poured the wrong vintage for his table. The young man cried. He dragged me in here. Is he coming back? Please tell him I am quiet. I am being quiet. This was it. This was not just a bad personality. This was criminal imprisonment. Graham Whitlock was locking staff in closets for pouring the wrong wine. I pulled out my phone. My hands were steady now. I opened the voice recorder app and pressed the red button. Say that again, I commanded, holding the phone close to the crack in the door. Tell me exactly who locked you in there and why. It was Graham Whitlock. The young man's voice trembled through the door, clear enough for the microphone. He locked me in because of the wine. He took the key. He said I was garbage. I stopped the recording. I looked at Lydia. Her face was pale, but her eyes were hard. She was done making excuses for him. We had the moral high ground, and now we had the weapon to defend it. We are getting out of here, I said, pocketing the phone. And if anyone tries to stop us, I am going to play this for the entire world. The exit door was 10 feet away. The red light of the sign hummed with a low electrical buzz, the only sound in the concrete loading dock area. I tightened my grip on Lydia's hand, feeling her damp palm against mine. We were almost free. I could smell the fresh night air seeping through the cracks in the metal frame. Going somewhere. The voice was smooth, cultured, and cold as liquid nitrogen. I froze. Lydia let out a sharp gasp, her fingernails digging into my wrist, from the shadows of a stack of unused banquet chairs. Evelyn Whitlock stepped into the harsh fluorescent light. She was not wearing her coat. She was still in her mother-of-the-groom gown, holding a glass of champagne as if she was simply taking a stroll through the garbage collection area. Mrs. Whitlock, I said, positioning myself between her and Lydia. Get out of our way. Evelyn laughed. It was a dry, humourless sound. She took a slow sip of her drink, her eyes scanning Lydia with disdain. I knew you would try this, Evelyn said, shaking her head. Graham thought you were just nervous. He thought you were just a skittish little girl who needed a firm hand. But I told him you were a flight risk. That is why I had the valet keys secured in my office. You knew, Lydia whispered, her voice trembling. You knew I wanted to leave. And I did what was necessary. Evelyn interrupted, her voice snapping like a whip. We have guests from 3 continents in that ballroom. Lydia, we have business partners who are judging our stability based on this union. Do you really think I would let a little thing like your feelings derail a merger worth $50 million? She took a step closer, the heels of her shoes clicking ominously on the concrete. She looked past me, staring directly at my daughter. It is pathetic, really. Evelyn sneered. You are just like your mother, Graham told me about her. A weak woman who let a man walk all over her for 20 years. You have no backbone. Lydia, you are unstable, emotional, and frankly, you are lucky we are willing to fix you. Rage, hot and blinding, flared in my chest, but I forced it down. Anger would not help us here. Strategy would... My hand slipped into my pocket, my thumb hovering over my phone screen. I am not the woman I used to be, I said, my voice steady. And neither is she. We are leaving, Evelyn. And if you try to stop us, I will go to the police. I have photos of the prenuptial agreement you forced her to sign. I have a recording of the employee, Graham, locked in the storage closet. Evelyn paused. For a second, a flicker of annoyance crossed her face, but it was quickly replaced by amusement. Oh, Eleanor. She sighed, looking at me with pity. You poor provincial woman. Do you think the police in Raventon will care about a disgruntled waiter we donate 40% of their annual budget? As for the contract, my lawyers will say Lydia signed it willingly. It is your word against the Whitlock legacy. Who do you think they will believe she was right? In a courtroom, they would crush us. In a police station, they would silence us. But there was one place where their money could not buy silence fast enough. I pulled my phone out. I did not unlock it to call 911. I swiped right. I tapped the icon for the live video app that Lydia had installed for me months ago to watch her design tutorials. I saw the little red live indicator flash in the corner. I held the phone against my chest, the camera lens facing outward, aimed directly at Evelyn. "So you admit it?" I asked, pitching my voice to be clear. "You admit you are forcing my daughter to marry Graham against her will to secure a business deal?" Evelyn rolled her eyes, completely unaware she was broadcasting to my 300 friends. Lydia's 2,000 followers, and anyone else scrolling the local feed. I am admitting that we own her. "Eleanor." Evelyn spat, losing her composure. She signed the papers. "She belongs to this family now. If she walks out that door, we will sue her for breach of contract. We will bankrupt her. We will make sure she never gets a job in this country again. She will do exactly what Graham tells her to do because she has no choice." The counter on the screen ticked up. 10 viewers? 50 viewers. The comments started scrolling up the side of the screen, fast and furious. "Is this real? Oh my God. Call the cops. That is Evelyn Whitlock and the abuse I pressed," taking a step back toward the door. "The fact that Graham is violent, you are okay with that? Graham is a man under pressure," Evelyn shouted, her veneer of elegance cracking. "If he has to discipline her to keep her in line, then that is her fault for provoking him. Now put that phone away and get back inside before I—" Suddenly, the heavy metal door behind us slammed open. Mother Graham burst into the loading dock, his face red with exertion and fury. He looked from Evelyn to me, and then he saw the phone in my hand. He saw the screen glowing. He saw the red live box. "What are you doing?" Graham roared, lunging forward. "Give me that run!" "Lydia," I screamed. I ended the stream and shoved the phone into my bra. I grabbed the handle of the exit bar and threw my weight against it. The door crashed open, spilling us out into the cool night air of the parking lot. "Get them!" Evelyn shrieked from behind us. "You are dead!" Graham yelled, his footsteps pounding on the pavement. We did not look back. We ran toward the darkness of the employee parking lot, the sound of Graham's heavy breathing getting closer with every step. The heavy metal gate to the parking lot was chained shut, a final cruelty that forced us to double back into the service corridor. My lungs burned as we sprinted across the linoleum floor, the sound of Graham's heavy footsteps thundering behind us. We were trapped in the narrow hallway, sandwiched between the kitchen and the laundry rooms. Just as we reached the corner, a hand clamped onto Lydia's arm. "You little—" Graham snarled, yanking her back so hard she stumbled. I did not think. I did not hesitate. I lowered my shoulder and slammed my entire body weight into Graham's chest. It was the desperate, feral strength of a mother defending her cub. He stumbled back, his grip on Lydia loosening just enough for her to rip her arm away. "Get your hands off her," I screamed, placing myself between them. "Security!" Graham roared, his face turning a violent shade of purple. "Help arrest this crazy woman." A heavy door swung open, and a security guard, the same one who had stopped me earlier, rushed into the corridor. He took in the scene, a disheveled groom, a crying bride, and a hysterical older woman. His training kicked in, and he naturally sided with the man in the tuxedo. "Ma'am!" "Step back," the guard barked, reaching for the taser on his belt. "Step away from Mr. Whitlock. Right now, he is attacking us." I yelled, my hands shaking as I fumbled for my phone. He is dangerous. You have to listen. I said back off, the guard shouted, stepping toward me with menace. Listen to this, I shrieked, pressing the play button on the recording I had made at the storage room door. The hallway went silent, save for the tinny audio coming from my speaker. The sound of the young waiter sobbing was undeniable, followed by Graham's voice, cold and distinct. I will break your fingers if you make a noise. The guard froze in his tracks. His hand hovered over his weapon, but his eyes darted from me to Graham. He knew that voice. He knew the employee. That is... The guard stammered, confusion warring with duty. That is Tommy. Where is he? He is locked in storage 4, I said, looking the guard in the eye. Graham locked him in there because he poured the wrong wine. She is lying, Graham shouted, stepping forward, his fists clenched. She doctored the tape. Grab her. Lydia stepped out from behind me. She wiped the tears from her face, and for the first time all day, she stood tall. He is not lying, Lydia said, her voice shaking but clear. I am not doing this voluntarily. I am being held against my will. If you help him, you are an accomplice to kidnapping. Before Graham could lunge at her, the service door at the end of the hall burst open. Uncle Morris stepped through, with Evelyn Whitlock right on his heels. Evelyn shrieked. Her face twisted in panic. Tell them to stop. Get the car. Morris looked at the scene. He looked at the guard, who was now backing away from Graham. He looked at me, holding the phone like a shield. Then, he looked at Evelyn. It is over. Evelyn, Morris said, his voice flat. What are you saying? Evelyn hissed. Do something, Mrs. Hartwell, Morris said, nodding at my phone. Play the other one, the one from the loading dock. I tapped the screen. Evelyn's voice echoed off the concrete walls. We own her. If she walks out that door, we will sue her. Bankrupt her. The guard's jaw dropped. He took a decisive step away from Graham, positioning himself between the Whitlocks and us. Graham snapped. With a feral growl, he swung a wild punch at Morris, screaming about betrayal. Hey, the guard yelled. He moved faster than a man his size should be able to. He tackled Graham, slamming him against the wall and pinning his arm behind his back. Graham struggled, kicking and spitting, but he was neutralized. Let him go, Evelyn screamed, rushing at the guard. I will have your badge. I will have your job. Morris stepped in front of Evelyn, blocking her path with his massive frame. Touch him. And you go to jail too. Evelyn, Morris said, his voice low and dangerous. I am not going down for this family anymore. Everything must be reported to the police. You called them, Evelyn gasped, horror dawning on her face. Better, Morris said, glancing at the exit sign. I called the news. I grabbed Lydia's hand. The guard nodded at us, signaling for us to go. We ran down the rest of the corridor and pushed through the emergency exit doors. We spilled out onto the front steps of the hotel, and the night turned into day. Dozens of camera flashes erupted in our faces. A news van from the local station was parked directly in front of the valet stand, the reporter already shouting questions. Morris had timed it perfectly. The story was not going to be buried. It was going to be the headline. Mrs. Hartwell Lydia, a reporter yelled. Is it true the wedding was coerced? The crowd of guests inside the lobby began to press against the glass windows, watching in shock. I wrapped my arm around Lydia's shoulders, shielding her from the glare. Keep walking, I whispered. Do not stop. We walked past the cameras, past the shocked valet, and out toward the main road. The facade of the Whitlock dynasty was crumbling behind us, loud and public, but all I cared about was the girl walking beside me. She was shaking, but she was free. The flashing lights of the police cruisers painted the hotel driveway in chaotic strokes of red and blue. It was finally over. I sat on the back bumper of an ambulance, a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, watching the officers escort Graham Whitlock into the back of a patrol car. He was not shouting anymore. He looked small, defeated, and terrified. The police took our statements separately, but the video I had live-streamed was the undeniable nail in the coffin. It had been recorded, saved, and shared by thousands of people before Graham could even touch the phone. The footage of Evelyn confessing to the coercion, combined with the audio recording of the young waiter Graham had locked in the closet, gave the district attorney everything he needed. Graham was formally detained for investigation into unlawful imprisonment, assault, and coercive control. Even Evelyn, the untouchable Queen of Raventon, was being questioned for her role in the forced marriage. Her empire of reputation, built over 40 years, had collapsed in less than 40 minutes. 3 weeks later. The silence was the first thing I noticed. We were in Brightland, a quiet coastal town 2 hours away from the madness. I had rented a small cottage with a porch that overlooked the dunes. It was not a mansion. There were no crystal chandeliers or waiters pouring wine. It was small, drafty, and absolutely perfect. Lydia sat on the porch swing, wrapping her hands around a mug of hot tea. I sat beside her, listening to the rhythm of the ocean. We watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold. I wrote that note in the bathroom, Lydia said softly, breaking the silence. I was shaking so hard I could barely hold the lipstick. I did not think you would do anything. I thought you would tell me to calm down. I thought you would tell me to go back out there. I would have burned the building down first, I replied, looking out at the water. Lydia looked at me, tears spilling over her lashes. I am sorry, Mom, she whispered. I am so sorry I got us into this. You did not get us into anything, I said, taking her hand. You got us out. Lydia, for 20 years. I let your father make me feel small. I did not save myself until it was almost too late. When I saw that fear in your eyes, I knew I could not change my past. But I could change your future. My phone buzzed on the table. It was a text message from a number I did not have saved, but I knew who it was. Thank you. For the first time in 60 years, the house is quiet. I can finally breathe. Em. I smiled and put the phone away. Morris was free too. The Whitlock grip had shattered for everyone. Lydia took a deep breath. The salt air filling her lungs. She had started emailing her old clients that morning. She was taking her maiden name back. She was starting over, not as a victim, but as a survivor. She had already rejected 3 settlement offers from the Whitlock lawyers, choosing instead to cooperate fully with the prosecution. I think I am going to paint the living room yellow, Lydia said suddenly. Bright yellow. She turned to me, and there it was. A smile. It was not the tight, terrified grimace from the wedding. It was genuine. It reached her eyes, crinkling the corners. It was the smile of a woman who owned her own life. I squeezed her hand tightly. We had walked through the fire, and we had come out the other side. We were not unscarred, but we were unbroken. And for the first time in a long time, we were free. Thank you all so much for listening to our story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment below to share your thoughts and connect with the community. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to Grandma's Family Diary. Give us a like and hit that hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.